Turning now to our program, please welcome Dan Meyer, owner and publisher of the Biz Times, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President-elect Beth. Our speaker today is Dr. Mike Knetter, Senior Advisor, Investments and Business Development for the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Mike joined the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association as President and Chief Executive Officer in 2010, leading the organization for more than 14 years. During his tenure, Mike led a variety of initiatives to support the advancement of UW-Madison, including the launch of a new constituent relationship management system, the $4.2 billion Always Forward campaign, and the 2014 merger of the UW Foundation and the Wisconsin Alumni Association. Before joining WFAA, Mike served as Dean of the Wisconsin School of Business for 8 years and was Associate Dean and Professor of International Economics in the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. He also served as Senior Staff Economist for the Council of Economic Advisors for former Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Locally, Mike chaired the Capital Campaign for the Road Home Dane County, a nonprofit that helps find housing and work solutions for homeless families in Dane County. Mike completed his undergraduate studies in economics and mathematics at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and his PhD in economics at Stanford University. Mike's hometown is Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to my friend and favorite Wisconsin hodag, Mike Knetter.
Thank you for that, Dan. I'll have to send you a shorter bio. When you have to go back to 2010 and 1988, you know, you're getting a little long in the tooth. So I'll buff that up for the future. But thank you for the invitation to be here today. Really a pleasure to be joining you. I obviously have done a lot of work in Milwaukee during my career as business dean and also at the foundation. Have a lot of friends in this community and a lot of friends in this room. So I apologize to them in advance for anything I say that rubs them the wrong way. So my talk today is American Capitalism Meets America First. It's a really interesting time to be out giving talks about the economy. Certainly in my lifetime, we've never had this much sweeping change in a number of different areas that touch the economy. Not all of these changes are necessarily designed as economic policies. Some of them maybe have national security objectives, and some of them may have certain types of redistribution objectives. But America First policies, which I'll define in a bit, are certainly something that we should be looking at and asking, you know, how does it relate to the principles of American capitalism that I believe have created the greatest economy the Earth's ever seen. And I think we should be very careful to tend to the foundations of American capitalism. So I'm going to quickly review recent economic performance. You know, people watch the economy daily, monthly, and try to assess how are these policies working. I'm going to review what I think the current drivers are of economic trends and performance. I'll give some thoughts on the America First policy mix and a bit of a near and long-term outlook. So right now, I'd say the U.S. economy is really quite healthy. You know, I'd give it a 6 out of 10 rating. The liabilities being large fiscal deficits, widening income inequality, and inflation above the Fed's target, and a bit of paralysis about what to do about that now that the labor market looks to be softening a bit. So unemployment is still low by any reasonable historic measure, but employment growth is slowing, and that has to do with a couple things. Number one, we got to get used to much smaller monthly gains in employment because the labor force is not growing very rapidly anymore. So the employment growth is going to slow, and then also the adoption of AI may be creating some softness in certain parts of the labor market. You've probably all read about new college grads. I think the reason they've got a softer market has a lot to do with firms planning and maybe just uncertainty about how much they can use AI, how much you really need entry-level people. I mean, if you ever used to hire someone for a research job, I have a suggestion. AI is a pretty good research assistant. Real GDP growth certainly resilient and aided in part by pretty significant productivity gains of late, which again, probably are a reflection of artificial intelligence adoption. Inflation is elevated, but at least stable at this point, 2.7%, higher than the Fed's target. The Fed has had this last mile problem of getting inflation back to target for some time now. I expected that they would be patient about it because I think people understood why we had inflation. It was pandemic-related, spending by two different administrations, frankly, to keep things from falling apart. But nonetheless, pretty soon the Fed's going to start losing credibility if they don't get things back to target or set a different target. Equity markets and household net worth are at all-time highs on any given day. Interestingly, gold prices are also at all-time highs. Those things usually don't go together. And the dollar has weakened over the past year, not alarmingly so, but there's a little more energy behind the dollar weakening just lately, and I think that has to do with both fiscal deficits and maybe a sense that the U.S. has pushed the world from really a unipolar world built around the U.S. economic strength to a multipolar world that may not be as dependent on the dollar in the future. So something to watch. But nonetheless, we sit here today, really solid momentum in the economy heading into 2026. But I would say this relatively benign 6 out of 10 economy is masking two really different forces that are determining this performance in quite different ways. So quick review of the data, just so you know I'm not making this up. Here's the chart. Most of my charts go back to 1960. So you're really getting a lot of information here, 75 years worth of data, or 65 years worth of data for the most part. And you can see unemployment rates have rarely ever been lower than they are today. And so that's a good thing. Employment growth sort of got back to its pre-pandemic trajectory. If you had extended that line through the collapse of the pandemic and just extended it out a few years, we sort of got back to trend, but that's flattening out, and that's going to continue to flatten out because organically our workforce isn't growing very fast anymore. We have exits that about equal the new entrants, and we don't have as many foreign workers entering the country. Real GDP growth, however, is sort of back to long-term trend. This is year-on-year performance measured on a quarterly basis. And you can see we're kind of right in the sweet spot of where we've been growing for a long time. So if you abstract from kind of the big gyrations of business cycles where you can have GDP collapse and then bounce back, 2.5% is pretty good in an economy with a labor force that's growing at about 1.5% for most of this period, and then maybe 1 percentage point of productivity growth gets you to the 2.5. We're probably going to be relying more on productivity growth in the future because I expect labor force growth to stay low for quite some time. Inflation, as you can see, whether you look at the all-in CPI, the blue line, or the red line, which is the ex-food and energy, we're below 3% now, but we've kind of flattened out around 2.7. And, that would suggest the Fed should be hiking rates to try to slow the economy down to get that last bit of inflation out. But they're getting a lot of pressure to cut rates because maybe the labor market's softening and there's a bit of paralysis there. And people often talk about, will the economy have a soft landing? I've been saying for a while, I don't know if Jerome Powell's going to have a soft landing. We'll see. That was a joke. You can, sorry, I don't mean to make light of Jerome Powell's plight. It's, maybe fairly serious, but real trade-weighted dollar has softened a bit and has softened further since I made this chart. Still nothing terribly alarming, but something to keep an eye on. And consumer confidence has turned down, and I think another report came out today. There's two different measures: consumer confidence by the Conference Board, consumer sentiment by the University of Michigan. The Conference Board number has held up better, and that's on this chart, than the consumer sentiment number of the University of Michigan. That one is kind of now down toward lower quartile of its history. This one is more, in the middle of its range, but it's definitely kind of trending down. And as I said, the report that I saw out today, just in a headline, looks like it's declined further yet. So what are the big drivers that are shaping these outcomes today? The economy is in a major transitional moment, I would say, driven by both public policy and a technological revolution. The momentum of the artificial intelligence technology boom created by American capitalism, yes, that was not created by Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Barack Obama. That was created by American business, consumers deciding what they want, producers deciding what they want, investors allocating capital where they saw the best returns, in a system that kind of had clearly defined rules. And it's been a very interesting period for America, and I'll put it in context in a few minutes. But this AI boom, I think, may be affecting the economy in a bigger and faster way than any technology we've ever seen. AI is very easy to use in many different situations, and it can make a big difference very quickly. So I expect the adoption and the impact will be pretty fast. The other thing that's moving really fast is the current administration. They've implemented many major policy shifts, mainly through executive actions, which allows them to move with speed. But I will argue today, do erode a lot of the foundations of American capitalism. That's not really going to put a dent in performance in the short run, but these are things that over decades start to take a toll. And we'll talk about a couple good examples where you see what happens in an economy where government plays too big a role in resource allocation. The interesting thing is, the sheer power of this tech revolution that's hitting the economy right now, I argue, is masking the adverse impacts that some of these America First policies will have. And even Soviet 5-year plans worked pretty well for a while. I mean, government dictates about resource allocation. You can mobilize people and they can do a lot of things in the short run, and maybe you don't need to be innovating and having a decentralized market-based system where people have to fight out what are the best opportunities and ideas. But over the long run, you don't want one person deciding where to invest your capital. And there's a lot more of that going on today than makes me comfortable as a fan of American capitalism. So let's talk a little bit about that first factor impacting the economy, AI dominance. One of the people I read religiously about the economy is a guy named Michael Sembalist at JP Morgan. He's their chief strategist, writes a column, Eye on the Market. I would highly recommend it. A recent installment of that identified the Blob, a group of 41 AI-related companies, either the large language model builders or utility companies or capital allocators, data centers. They accounted for 75% of S&P 500 returns, 80% of S&P earnings growth, and 90% of CapEx growth, all since the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022. We just haven't seen anything like this, where such a small group of firms has such a big impact. And AI is really the latest manifestation of American capitalism, which I would argue is the most dynamic economy the earth has ever seen. And, people will ask, well, yeah, we know America's good and we got the best tech firms, but, other economies are pretty good too. And how would you really say America's special? These are the 10 largest US companies measured by market capitalization. And the interesting thing about this is 8 of those 10 companies did not exist in 1975. So that's 50 years ago, and you have companies that didn't exist and are now among the 10 biggest public companies in a really big mature economy. And I'm claiming to you that that's highly unusual. And one of my proof points is the next slide. These are the 10 largest German companies by market cap. Only one of them is less than 50 years old. And that's even cheating because Deutsche Telekom was a division of the Deutsche Bundespost, which is a company that's older than the United States of America, okay? So none of the top 10 German companies are less than 50 years old. That's normal, actually. That's what the world is like in most places. And we are demonstrably different. The way American economy reinvents itself, because we are on the technological frontier, we're not borrowing technology from anyone else to figure out how to build a better mousetrap. We have to invent it and deploy it to stay ahead. And we are very good at doing that. And I would say the way that happens is through American capitalism. You know, it's an interesting thing for me to talk about because as Dan mentioned, I got a PhD in economics in the mid-'80s. I was, kind of a wayward young man sent off from Rhinelander High School to UW Eau Claire to see if I could pull myself together. And I had some really great professors there. And somehow I managed to get into Stanford University. So I'm out there, getting schooled by everyone who went to a better school and was kind of more equipped for that PhD program. But it was a great, great experience for me. And I loved that. And at that time in the mid-'80s, you couldn't pick up Business Week without, once a month reading about how Germany and Japan were going to eclipse the United States as the economic superpowers of the world. When is the last time anyone's said that? Probably sometime in the 90s, but people were really pretty convinced. And, what this chart shows is the share of global GDP that the US, the EU, China, Japan, India, and the UK have. And what's remarkable about it is we've kind of held on to our share for the last 25 years, kind of against the odds, I would say. China's had a growing share because they were really developing from nothing, and it kind of flattened out a little bit. The EU, as it turned out, had a declining share over this period, and Japan had a declining share. But you'll see there was a time from 1980 to the mid-'90s where Japan and Europe gained a lot of ground on the US. What happened? Why did that stop? So yeah, they were anointed the rising star economies in the 70s and 80s because their autos, steel, and electronics grew relative to the US leaders in those categories. And those were, when those are big sectors in your economy, you can't help but think those are the most important parts of the economy. And there's a lot of debate about what to do, and Ronald Reagan was president from 1980 to 1988. He was under a lot of pressure to protect autos, steel, electronics, different sectors that were under this foreign competitive pressure. And it's not that he didn't do some, take some actions to provide relief, anti-dumping laws or different things that we use for some temporary protection. But for the most part, Reagan allowed US producers to face the competition and allowed US consumers to buy whatever they wanted at the best prices or the best quality, whatever they thought, the best value. And let's see where the chips fall in our capitalist economy. What happened? Well, Germany and Japan did maintain stronger positions in those categories of autos, steel, electronics, et cetera. But if you'll notice now, they're under enormous pressure from the Chinese, the Koreans, and others who are moving into those categories aggressively because those things, they will turn over as other countries build competencies and they have maybe more competitive labor markets or better value. In the US, capital stopped flowing to those sectors and flowed elsewhere. And, that's how the tech sector got built. And it was being built in Silicon Valley already in the 80s when I was there. But at that time, nobody really knew where is that going to lead. I had a computer, I wasn't doing punch cards anymore. I could, write programs on a computer, but it was early innings and no one was saying, well, hey, just watch, we're building a tech sector and that's going to be the highest margin industries on the planet and you'll be happy we did this. People were still worried. And then fast forward today, as I said, when was the last time anybody thought Germany and Japan are going to eclipse the United States? It's laughable. So, and you see here, since 2010, US equities, the blue line outperforming the all-country world index, the red line, by a pretty hefty margin. And that's sort of a reflection of this technology leadership, that our companies are the most desired companies in the world. So my thesis is simply this, that decentralized democratic capitalism delivered the resource allocation and incentives that have made the US economy exceptional. And I'm just going to list what I think most economists would say are the ingredients that make that provide the foundation that allows your economy to have this kind of dynamism and success. And it's competition. Our regulators tend to put the consumer interest ahead of the producer interest. Rule of law. When you enter into an investment partnership, what the rules are, and they're going to be enforced. And you kind of understand the backdrop of taxes, tariffs, whatever, that exist, that shape the competitive environment, and you can make decisions counting on those being what you think they will be. Our openness to trade and immigration have done wonders for the economy. Trade puts a certain kind of pressure on producers to be their best and to be consumer focused and deliver value. And it puts pressure on investors to figure out where are the best opportunities for our country to distinguish itself. The only industry in which we're probably even more dominant or as dominant as we are in technology is higher education. And that has served us incredibly well because you're not leading the AI and tech revolution with a high school degree. I'm sorry, not even with an undergrad degree for the most part. And you can say Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard. He grew up in the shadow of University of Washington in Seattle when they had the world's only supercomputer, and he was playing with it as a middle schooler and high schooler. So, that's a footnote that we shouldn't mistake for, oh yeah, people just go from high school to Palantir and they're going to be fine. Maybe, but certainly that's not going to solve our education system issues writ large. And not to say higher ed can't run better, it can, but being dominant there has also attracted the world's best and brightest. Many of them have stayed and helped drive that AI and tech revolution in America, and those that go home are the best sales force we have in their home economies. Because you go back to India with an advanced degree from UW-Madison or another great university, you have a really great career. You got pictures up on your wall with Modi. I've been to visit our alumni in these countries, and that's how important they are. And that's an asset that the United States should probably use better. A stable monetary system is really important to this, and Fed independence is important to a stable monetary system. And I know it's popular today to say, oh, the Fed was never independent. All these chairmen got picked by some president. Yeah, they did. But there are rules about who gets to pick governors and when, and that's what the independence is. Any individual governor will have some biases. It's not a problem. That's not the point. There's a process and there's governance, and we shouldn't trample over it. Sound corporate governance is really important. Investors have rights in this country, and that's part of what makes this the most investable market on the planet. Our broad, deep, and unfettered capital markets is kind of where the invisible hand does its work. A lot of people talk about, oh, too many people are in finance in America. Well, we have the best financial markets in the world, and don't underestimate how important it is for money to get to the right place and to have people who are good at figuring out where it should go. And then finally, entrepreneurial culture and management talent. Those are, to me, a list of very plausible things that have gotten us where we are today, and they created that machine, AI and technology, that's driving things. So national industrial policies, more common in Germany and Japan, have just proven no match for this. They could marshal the resources coming out of World War II and build a manufacturing sector, and then they've protected it. And now they're stuck there, and now they have to deal with China and Korea. in all their end markets. We've moved on to newer and better things where we don't really face competitors, and that's why the margins are so high. So I would say now we've reached this point where, tech dominance, it isn't just about being more successful economically. Tech dominance determines military superiority, political leadership in the world, pretty much every source of power today. And now we're going to shift our policies like 180 degrees in a lot of different dimensions. So key pillars of America First. This is my shorthand. Maybe not all of these are things that the administration would say are part of the America First package, but there's been a lot of fiscal activity, some of that good, trying to shrink government spending. We do have a large fiscal deficit. That's one of our problems. The big, beautiful bill probably didn't really help that, but maybe the tariffs will help close that deficit a bit. So we'll see how that goes. And we had a government shutdown. It was pretty active year. I mean, it's easy to forget Elon Musk with the chainsaw, but there he was. Monetary policy, we're sort of challenging Fed independence in ways that I haven't seen before. In international trade, we used to operate on a rules-based international system that everybody was a part of. We've just kind of blown that up, and we're going bilaterally at every country in the world, and that is a mess, okay? You can't, that's going to create so much overhead and so much lobbying and so much misdirected effort by CEOs to try to, tilt the playing field in their favor, doing favors for people to get what they want, instead of focusing on consumers and innovation and value added. It's too much politics. Labor, immigration and migration are down sharply. We need a better immigration policy. I used to always say the United States should recruit workers and citizens like the Badgers recruit football players. But now I say like the Hoosiers recruit football players. Sorry. Hopefully like the Badgers recruit football players this year. Higher education, a big attack on, the so-called wokeism that has become too important in higher ed, cancel culture, not enough free debate. And I think there were a lot of things that needed to be improved in higher education. I think some of those improvements have been made. I certainly see the evidence of that. But I also see attacks on research funding that really doesn't have as much to do with that. Now, maybe we were spending more than we needed to on research. That's up for debate. But nonetheless, that's another area that we're attacking with a lot of vigor. And then industrial policy. There's direct government investments. There's pulling in CEOs and jawboning them about investing in Venezuela. I'm sure you saw all the interesting discussions about that, some of the news clips or SNL skits in any case. And then, to be fair, deregulation or reduced enforcement in certain parts of the economy, which can be a good thing because, a lot of red tape builds up over time in government. And I think it's important to acknowledge that some deregulation is really healthy in the economy. So suffice it to say, I'm putting all these things under the rubric of America First. Maybe they aren't all necessarily America First, but these are the directional policies of the administration. And I'm not saying that all these policies are intended to make economic outcomes better for the average person. It could be to shift resources from one group to another, or it could be national security. But make no mistake, these policies will have economic consequences. Tax cuts and deregulation probably boost economic activity. All these trade frictions, they reduce specialization and division of labor. They're a drag on growth, and they will add to inflation. Barriers to immigration are going to rapidly reduce labor force quality and quantity. The erosion of Fed independence is probably going to increase the long-term expected inflation. It'll keep high interest, long-term interest rates higher for longer, and it will ultimately weaken the dollar. And then attacks on research and foreign students are going to reduce human capital and innovation. So at this moment, of course, having fewer foreign students this year, it's not a calamity, but over time, all these things will add up. And in the long run, they are eroding the foundations of American capitalism. Now, I'm going to take a deep dive into a couple real quickly, and then I'll wrap up, because I see it's 5-1. So, international trade, we talk about this trade deficit all the time, and it's easy for people to get worried and think, oh my God, we have this big trade deficit, other countries aren't buying enough of our stuff. Of course, I did show you the chart on unemployment. Got like the lowest unemployment we've ever had. Like, where's that stuff coming from? I mean, we're at pretty much full employment, and yet we're spending more than we produce. So let's try to unpack that issue. So one point to know, international exchange between any US entity and any foreign entity is voluntary. Like, nobody's forced to do anything, and it only happens if both parties to an exchange feel like they're made better off for having done it. Otherwise it wouldn't happen, right? You're expending energy and effort. So every exchange has a buyer and a seller. And what that means is that for a country like the US, aggregate international exchange every year is balanced. Nobody owes anyone anything at the end of it. Like, we've exchanged things and it's balanced, but every trade made people better off. So if you accept that, anyone who comes along and says, wow, we had a trade deficit, that's terrible, you should say, well, explain to me why that's terrible. Like, what transactions shouldn't have happened here? So the sentiment, I think, turned against free trade because we do have these chronic goods and services deficits, which I'll explain in my next slide. And trade does, like technology innovation, there are winners and losers, right? The AI revolution could wipe out certain categories of employment, and those people have to find something else to do, and they're going to resent that. And the same thing happens with specialization through trade. There are some industries here that shrunk, and people might feel like, hey, I lost, my job and I had to do something else. And, there are also winners. I mean, that's why we had the trade in the first place. People bought these cars from Japan because they were better value. Somehow you got to work to compensate the losers better. And also, we may not like the pattern specialization that we end up with when we have free trade. There might have been industry gaps that created national security threats that we have to address. And if that's the case, we should just talk about what those are and give the Pentagon a big enough budget that they can source domestically these things that we need. Fighting a trade war over that doesn't make a lot of sense, because we probably could use some allies who have some of the stuff that we need, right? Because we don't have the number of people China does. They have about 1 billion more people than we do. They can probably be self-sufficient. We're too small. And we need our best people working in the tech sector driving that forward. So, trade deficits. Why do I think they're a red herring? So I just said total exchange is always balanced. Let's say we send $1 trillion worth of stuff to the rest of the world, and we get $1 trillion worth of stuff from them, right? For every buyer, there's a seller. In the aggregate, it's balanced. What's not balanced is if you break it up into two types of trade in assets versus trade in goods and services, those individual accounts are not balanced. So right now, we send, in my hypothetical example, $750 billion worth of assets to the rest of the world and $250 billion worth of goods and services. We get from them $350 billion worth of goods and services and only $650 billion worth of assets, okay? So that little region I've got shaded in the lower diagram is where we're giving them US assets and we're taking from them goods and services. That's what a trade deficit is. We don't owe anything next year. We're paying for it. We're giving them assets right now. So you have to ask, what's really the problem here? Trade deficits are paid for as they are incurred by the US assets that foreigners are acquiring. And those assets can be stocks, bonds, property, direct investment. Scale is important. The numbers on the trade deficit can be staggering. Like currently it's like $1 trillion, or it was. The cumulative trade deficits, if you add them all up since 2000, $12.5 trillion. So that's how many more assets from the US foreigners were getting relative to the assets of foreign countries we were getting. Leaves us in a situation today, foreign entities own about 31 trillion in US marketable securities compared to us owning 16 trillion in foreign securities. But what happened since 2000? US household net worth grew from 35 trillion to $176 trillion. Grew by an average of $5 trillion a year. And we're worried about an average trade deficit during that period of a $500 billion. Who cares? That is a complete non-issue unless you think it's somehow created national security concerns or you want to reallocate resources to people who maybe were hurt by trade. Then do that. Reallocate resources, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'll just say, why do you think it would be that they buy more of our assets than we buy of theirs? Pretty easy. We got rule of law, we have the best capital markets, and we have the highest margin industries on the planet. We are a wealthy country running very large fiscal deficits with great investment opportunities, and we spend more than we produce in a given year, largely because we have like a 6% of GDP budget deficit. So what do you expect? That's what markets are going to give you in those circumstances. So the high household net worth is the thing that should make us feel fairly comfortable. It's not as evenly allocated as we would like. So Aaron, can I go 5 more minutes? What do you think? 2 minutes. American higher education leadership, 8 of the 10 best universities in the world, even if you let foreign entities do the ranking. Shanghai rankings or the Times of London, American universities, 8 of the top 10. The British ranking puts a couple British universities higher than they deserve to be. Okay, big deal. But that is incredible dominance, and we get the brightest people from the world coming here to get advanced degrees. Why does that matter? Well, we're a large net exporter of higher ed services. We make a lot of money on that business, I'll tell you that, and we could be making more. It also builds human capital in our population, which helps us be the technology leader. It attracts the best and brightest from around the world. Many of them like to stay here. A lot of the founders of the largest companies and best run companies, almost all came out of our top universities, and many of them immigrants or first generation Americans. And the synergies between research universities and our tech leadership is evident when you look at where these companies are. They're on the doorstep of a lot of these top-ranked universities. So I rest my case on that. Our population, natural population growth is going to zero out here around 2030. So if we don't have immigration, we will slowly, over time, have a higher and higher dependency ratio. We'll have more retired people and under 16 people relative to workers than we've had in our history. And a lot of our systems, like Social Security, were designed for growth. So we're going to have to confront some difficult circumstances if we don't come up with a more rational immigration policy. So my base case for the year ahead, sluggish employment growth and sluggish labor force growth, maybe a little uptick in unemployment due to AI. That'll be something to watch. Modest real GDP growth, I think, continues. I don't think inflation's coming down because I think the tariffs are still with us, and the weaker dollar is going to start to also push up import prices. But over time, America First is going to erode American capitalism. And I think those are things that we absolutely have to be thinking about and confront. So I will stop there and take questions. I'll close with Michael Semblis, the guy from JP Morgan that I mentioned a year ago. His economic outlook for 2025 kind of said, it looks like based on Project 2025, the administration is intent on breaking a lot of our economic institutions. And if you do too much of that at once, don't be surprised if bad things happen. And it made me think of my old Chicago economist buddy who used to have an office next door to me at the Hoover Institution, where I was a proud Bradley Fellow, Jim Barry, working for Robert Hall, who used to get a lot of Bradley money. I don't know if he still does, but Russell Roberts said his mother always used to say, don't just stand there, do something, when things were happening in the kitchen or, people setting the table. But he said for policymakers, it's just the opposite. Don't just do something, stand there and let the market work, and that's, I think, what got us here. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Mike. Rotarians love their Q&A, so thanks for leaving a little bit of time for that. If you do have a question for Mike, I invite you to join me at the microphone, and please be sure to introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it. My name is Kyle. I just had a question. China's mass producing electric vehicles, and they can sell them for a lot less than we can. And both parties have said they can't sell them here in the United States. So is your position, let it, because they're worried about auto workers losing their job, they're worried about the industry taking a huge hit, somewhat similar to what happened with the steel industry. Is your position, let that play out and see how it goes? Is that sort of where you come from on that?
Yeah, it might have to be somewhat orderly, although I would say I don't even think China's ready to feed the entire world market with electric vehicles if we were to be a significant buyer. So probably I'd have some quotas for a while that phase in so that you give industries and people time to adjust. But I don't actually think electric vehicles are the most important strategic industry on the planet, and we should probably buy them from the most efficient source so that we can concentrate our resources on other things. So that would be the answer that I have to go with, because I believe in markets, and I believe that this country, there's just, the Luddites have never been right. Yes, industries go away, people find other things to do. Yes.
Jeff Smoller, you accurately portrayed what America First is doing, and I think you could harken back to what happened under President Biden with Intel and the green economy and so some of the picking favorites, if you will. In business, they say culture eats strategy for lunch, Mr. Drucker. And if culture eats strategy for lunch in business, what are your thoughts on the data that show an increasing loss of confidence in capitalism, especially by the Z generation, others, increasing embracing of socialism, which is hardly a free economy, and the accusation by the Dartmouth president that it all started in the college classrooms?
I think the Dartmouth president, and I did work at Dartmouth. I don't know the new president, but I knew Jim Wright very well, who was a Wisconsin boy who was president of Dartmouth when I was there. I think it starts way before college campuses. So I don't know if any of you have college-age kids, but they tend not to just believe everything adults say. They're pretty cantankerous. I do think the population of kids we get today were, I think, kind of convinced that activism is the same as actually knowing something. And that's the thing that scares me. And so I do think it's very easy to say, oh my God, the United States has so much wealth, we could make everybody happy if we just redistributed it. And so I agree with you, somewhere the education system is failing us. I think it's happening way before college. And one of the things I'm working on at UW is to make sure that we get back to foundations where we're teaching people about the importance of free enterprise, capitalism, because that is a very concerning trend to me. But I think we've allowed income inequality to become so great in this country that that's what we're getting for not paying attention to that. And, it's one of the things that I regret. I skipped over that slide, but one of the things we don't talk about as a country in the public policy domain enough is the inequality and how to address it. And if you thought it was bad, the AI revolution is so narrow, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. So great question, thank you.
Hi, Teresa Esser. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it. There were a lot of things that I agreed with. There was one thing that I'd like to call into question. I recall you saying that AI was founded by business or created by business, and I was taught that AI came out of the university system. AI is based on academic research. If you look at the fathers of AI, Alan Turing, government employee, Marvin Minsky, MIT academic, Alan Newell, Carnegie Mellon, and then the Dartmouth College Conference. The Dartmouth College Conference was the beginning of AI. So I would argue that it wasn't businesses that started AI, it was federal research grants, and that federal research grants delivered the resource allocation and incentives that have made the US economy exceptional. That's different from what your slide was. In order to continue the tech dominance, I think we need to continue the federal research grants. So I think we're agreeing a lot there, but what I'm concerned is that people don't know where the AI came from. And because if you don't know our history, if you don't know that AI came from academia, it came from government research grants, it came from government employees, you won't know why it's important to continue to fund research because we
Fair
want
point,
these.
yeah, so.
Do you agree? Is this
Yeah,
from left
yeah, no,
field? That's my question.
So there's definitely foundational papers about artificial intelligence computing that created the basis for this industry, but the industry was brought to life outside of the academy by decentralized decision makers. So I think it takes all of that, and I am a big believer that university research is one of the reasons we have technological dominance. So there's definitely the maybe founding fathers of AI were people doing research projects at universities. I accept that. I think I was just trying to say the big powerful force driving the American economy forward today has nothing to do with the current policies that are being implemented. It has to do with a history of investing, and that's why I put the universities and research as one of the things that makes America exceptional. So, thank you.
All right, we have time for one more brief question.
This will be quick. First, I have to thank you two ways. One, you were a new dean when I got my executive MBA at Madison. So
Congratulations. I hope it served you well.
yes, and thank you for an amazing presentation. The one question I have is you put a lot of weight on AI and the revolution. How much of what is happening today a bubble as far as investment goes, and how much is the American economy actually seeing the benefits of AI? Just quickly, the MIT report that came out saying most companies that have invested in AI have still not seen the benefits of AI. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we're early innings in implementation at companies, and so you probably won't see enough of that traction very soon. And there is a lot of investment going on that is going to pay dividends over a long period of time. And this is a little different than other periods where there've been a lot of investment that I would say was more levered. I mean, a lot of these investments are companies that have huge cash piles, they're generating huge cash. And so some of the companies whose prices have been elevated a lot over the last few years will prove to be also RANs, and their prices will correct. Others will be winners. It's hard to predict who's who at any given time. And so, yeah, there's probably definitely some overinvestment. There's some investments that aren't going to pan out for people, and that's common in a phase like this. But I don't think there's going to be maybe as much contagion if there is a correction, because a lot of the capital is real and it's not levered in the same way. So that is the end for me, but thank you for your time. Appreciate your questions.